As promised, in our last video, we looked at the guy story. So this time we're going to look at the love story. But it really is a beautiful story. And not only is it a beautiful story about the love and commitment between people, but it's also a beautiful story about God and how He works. It's also a simple story, kind of like those simple stories I used to love when I was a kid. There was a book that was quite simple, only about 3 words per sentence, which puts it right on level with my reading. And it was about a dog. Anyone know what story I'm talking about? A story called See Spot Run. Yeah, it was a really simple story. See spot run, see spot jump, run spot run, and on and on. Well, in our time together, our story is sort of simple, just like Spot. And see, it's a story of Ruth, as found in the book of Ruth. Now, many love stories start with once upon a time. And our story kind of starts the same way in chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him." Last time we looked at Judges and the difficulties that were there for Israel. Remember, Israel had come from Egypt. They wandered in the desert for nearly 40 years. Moses dies. Joshua leads them into the promised land, and they conquered the land in battles like the Battle of Jericho. And Joshua dies, and for over 300 years, Israel gets stuck in that cycle where they get in trouble. God raises up a new judge. Israel is delivered, and then they forget God again and find themselves back in trouble. Well, this story happens in that cycle. It begins with a man named Elimelech. I'll say that 10 times fast. But it starts with Elimelech and his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. At some point during the Judges, there was a famine in Israel. So Elimelech and his family left Bethlehem and went to Moab for a little while. After they moved there, Elimelech dies, and Naomi is left living in a foreign land with only her 2 sons. Naomi's name means pleasant, or some might even say sweet or beautiful. But Naomi probably wasn't feeling very pleasant at that time. But hey, at least she still has her 2 boys, and there's still some good left in her life. Her sons get married to 2 women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. Just a little bit of trivia for you if you didn't know this already. Oprah Winfrey was actually named after Orpah, but her parents misspelled the name, so she became Oprah. So technically, all those years, you could have been watching the Oprah Winfrey show. That's not really important to our lesson right now, and actually has no impact on your relationship with God, but it might be a good little piece of info to impress your friends with at any time. Anyways, the boys get married to Orpah and Ruth. Naomi is a little happier because she still has her 2 sons, and now she has 2 daughter-in-laws who she gets to put her arm around and care for them as her own daughters. And then her sons die. Naomi is all alone with her 2 daughter-in-laws. This wasn't good for them. And see, we can't really understand the seriousness of their situation because we live in such a different time. But in those days, if your husbands and sons died, that meant you had no land, no protector, no provider. In those days, only men could own property and pass it on to their male heirs. Also, men could only sell to other men. And so when her sons died, as heirs to what Elimelech had owned, all that was left was women. And so Naomi, she lost her property. She lost her protection, lost their providers. About this time, Naomi heard that things had gotten better in Israel, so she decides to go back home. Then she realized, my daughter-in-laws are not Jewish. They won't be received very well in Bethlehem. It's probably best if they stay in Moab. And that's when she says, picking back up in verse 8. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, "we want to go with you and your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? Of course not. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me." And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. Naomi said to her, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey, and when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. She responded, "Don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty God has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, remember, Naomi meant pleasant, but she tells all these people, "Stop calling me Naomi. My name is Mara." Mara meant bitter. She'd allowed the things in her life, the losses and trials, to make her bitter. She wasn't happy. And she saw God as the one who caused all of this to happen, so she's angry. And I think if we tried really hard, we could probably identify with Naomi or Mara. Isn't that what people do today? It's like opening a Christmas present, and you thought it was going to be an Xbox One, but it turns out to be a box of socks. It's not what you expected to happen, and so you're angry. Or more seriously, you get really bad news. You never saw it coming. And you cry out, "Why, God? Why has this happened?" That's where Naomi is in life. Remember our simple story, See Spot Run? Well, there are three simple things that we can see from three different characters in this story. And the first is, see Naomi hurt. Well, we can clearly see Naomi hurting here. And the thing that I notice is God doesn't strike her down for being angry or for lashing out against him. And Ruth doesn't let her bitterness drive her away. She could have said, while Naomi was wallowing in her pity and anger, "Fine, I'm leaving. I can find another husband. I don't need this." But instead, she clings to Naomi. As we see Naomi hurt, we also see Ruth love. We might look at that and say, why? Why would she stay? I mean, clearly she's got bad luck. But instead, she gives this beautiful speech saying, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people." Where have you heard those words before? I'm assuming a wedding. That's where I've heard them multiple times. We've used almost these exact words at weddings, but this wasn't a wedding. This was a woman to her mother-in-law. I mean, imagine if we started doing that today. The bride turns to her future mother-in-law and says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And where you are buried, I will be buried." Yeah, I don't think that will be coming back in any fashion anytime. But this is the relationship between them. And when I look at Ruth's response to Naomi and her choice, I learned something, and that is sometimes your greatest sacrifice can be the path to your greatest blessing. If you find yourself with struggles in life, remember Ruth, who says, "I'm going to stay. I'm going to do what's right because it's what I believe God's called me to do." See Ruth love. There's one more character in our story. Scripture says it's barley harvest time, and Ruth is going to go to the field and do what poor people did. It's called gleaning. You see, that they couldn't just take the food straight out of the field. God actually instructed the Israelites that if you have a field, don't harvest the very edges and the corners, so that the poor could come and pick what was left over. She ends up gleaning in the field of a man named Boaz. Now, spoiler alert, Boaz happens to be related to Ruth's dead father-in-law, but shh. Let's just read chapter 2, verses 5 through 16. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She's the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvester. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes rest in the shelter. Boaz went over and asked and said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field and see which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I've warned the young women not to treat you, I've warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. She asked, what have I done to deserve such kindness? I'm only a foreigner. Boaz replied, yes, I know, but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I've heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. She replied, I hope I continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I'm not one of your workers. At mealtime, Boaz called to her, come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine. So she sat with the harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted and still had some left over. And when Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up and don't give her a hard time. He doesn't just let her go in there, but he tells them to purposely drop some for her to pick up. So she takes home around 30 pounds of barley, which is unbelievable for someone as poor as Naomi and Ruth are. And she's coming home with just a ton of food, and Naomi is just blown away with what has happened. And so she asked, starting in verse 19, where did you gather all this grain today? Naomi asked. Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you. So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. And she said, the man I worked with today is named Boaz. Naomi told her daughter-in-law, may the Lord bless him. He is showing his kindness to us as well as your dead husband. See, that man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. Then Ruth said, what's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed. Naomi exclaimed, good. Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with his young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you will be safe with him. You see, Naomi is starting to pick up on what's happening here. Things have been so negative for Naomi, so much so that now her name is Mara. She's bitter, but now she's starting to see something else in front of her. The story takes a big turn here because God has another big surprise waiting. After a while, Naomi starts thinking about Ruth and Boaz and Ruth. And wait a minute, he's our family redeemer, our guardian redeemer. Now, what is a guardian redeemer or family redeemer? Well, here's my best stab at legal history. Under the law of Moses, if a husband dies, then his property and possessions were given to his male heirs. If there were no male heirs, then it was given to others, divided up among other members of his tribe. However, if one of his closest male relatives stood up and said, I'd like to buy his property, he could. But not only does he have to buy it to have for his family, but he also has to marry the widow. It's really all about keeping the family line going. And that person is called a guardian redeemer. Boaz happens to be, or if you open your eyes and see God's story going on, God puts Boaz and Ruth in this place so that they are at the right place at the right time for them to meet. And so Naomi hatches a plan in chapter 3. One day Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath and put on perfume and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go, uncover his feet, and lie down there, and he will tell you what to do. Ruth replied, I will do everything that you say. Now, all of this seems strange to us, but Ruth knew exactly what Naomi was doing here. This was a ritual for her to present herself as a possible wife to Boaz. Boaz would be working at night, which shows the character of Boaz, that he was a working man and not one to abuse his power and wealth over those who worked for him. But after he was done working, he would lie down to sleep. And so she goes and lays down at his feet, presenting himself to him. And it goes on in verse 7 to say, after Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. And he asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer." Boaz exclaimed, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman. But while it's true that I am one of your family redeemers, there is another man who is more closely related to you than I am." Boaz is respectful of Ruth. Truth is, he could have taken advantage of her. He could have taken her even though he knew he didn't have the right. But instead he tells her that he doesn't want to ruin her reputation. He doesn't want her to be embarrassed because there's actually another man who is closer in relationship to her father-in-law. So actually that guy is the rightful guardian redeemer. He tells her that he is going to go and find him and ask him if he's interested. And if the guy says no, then Boaz says he would be honored to marry her. So he goes, he finds the guy, asks him if he wants to purchase all of Elimelech's property. And the guy says, sure. Boaz says, oh yeah, one more thing. If you are to do this, you have to marry Ruth. And the guy's like, no thank you. You can do it. I'm not interested. Well, why was he not interested? Well, it's because Ruth was not an Israelite. She was a Moabite. And by taking her as a wife, any children they might have together would have a claim to his property and wealth. And he couldn't afford a foreigner taking from the children he already had, so he passes. He tells Boaz, you buy it yourself, and then removes his sandal. Wait, what? What does that have to do with anything? Well, apparently, back then, when you have finalized a transaction with someone else, the way to finalize that transaction was to remove your sandal and give it to the other person. Thank goodness times have changed, right? I mean, try it. Next time you're at the store and you buy something, I want you to look at the cashier and hand her your sandal and see how well that goes over. Yeah, it's pretty gross, right? See, God blesses them and he teaches us a lesson. Boaz was a good man. But Boaz's name ends up being listed in the New Testament in the lineage of Jesus because of the choices that he made. He chooses to care for this family even though he didn't have to. See, we've already seen Naomi hurt and we've seen Ruth love. One more, the last one, and that is see Boaz bless. When we bless people who are in need, God will bless us. And it's not a one-for-one kind of thing. God's not a holy Coke machine when you put in one blessing and receive a blessing. But God blesses those who bless and care for others. And the blessings come in ways we can never imagine. Their blessings was something that they can never imagine. Ruth and Boaz get married and they have a baby. And Naomi goes from being Mara to being Naomi again because she has been blessed with the greatest blessing a woman could ever ask for, a grandbaby. I'm sure if I asked any of you watching, if you're grandparents or nanas or mimis or grannies or whatever you go by, if I asked any of you if grandkids were better than kids, I probably would get an overwhelming yes. My grandmommy has a pillow in her house that says if we knew how great grandchildren would be, we'd have had them first. And then you probably pull out an entire PowerPoint presentation of pictures to show just how much a blessing they are, right? See, Naomi sees that God has blessed her family. Yes, she has experienced hurt, but in all of that, here is this blessing. Why is he a blessing? Well, the last few verses of the book are sort of an Easter egg. Not the colorful eggs we hide once a year, but like in movies, they have these little clues, or my favorite is the after credit scenes. Some movies, if you stay until after all the credits are over, there's a little Easter egg at the end. It's an intentional hidden message. And so the last few verses here is like an Easter egg, or actually more like a Christmas present. It says that the child's name was Obed, who would grow up and have a son named Jesse, who would grow up and have a son named David, who would be the great, 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 great grandfather of Jesus. All of this because we saw Naomi hurt, Ruth love, and Boaz bless. There are 3 quick lessons that we can learn here, and my hope is that maybe you'll write these down and talk about them with your families because they are important lessons. And the first comes from Naomi, and it is, even when my faith fails, my God won't. Praise God that even when we're not faithful, God still is. When we feel defeated, exhausted, like we can't move forward, when we've experienced hurt, of pain, God is still there. When we feel like we've been given a raw deal, God is still faithful. And the second lesson comes from Ruth, and that is, when love guides you, you follow it. Love is what kept Ruth with Naomi. And when Naomi tells Ruth to go and lay at the feet of Boaz, it's love that makes Ruth say, I will do whatever you tell me to do. I mean, could you imagine if our kids just said that over and over again? I will do whatever you tell me to do. Could you imagine telling your mother-in-law that? What if we started telling God that? I will do whatever you tell me to do. Ruth tells us that when love is guiding you, follow it. And we know that God is love, and so we follow even when it means sacrificing or giving up something. Because when love guides you, follow it. And the last lesson is from Boaz, and that is this: blessing others is the path to a blessed life. Boaz blesses Naomi and Ruth and unknowingly steps into the story of Jesus. You never know when you may become a character in the story of Jesus. If you remember when we started walking through God's story, I said there's always a lower story and an upper story. Well, the lower story here is about loss and difficulty and love. But in the upper story that was going on, it was God saying, I want to put these people right here so that my story can be lived out. Think about it. This week, as God is moving pieces around, could it be that God is preparing you to play a role in the furthering of his story? You might say, well, that's what Jesus told us to do. Go and make disciples and all that. But that's kind of broad. I mean, do you think God might be preparing you to become a part furthering his story for someone else? Maybe you'll call someone who is lonely. Maybe you'll invite someone for dinner. Maybe you'll just send a card. Or maybe you'll see someone in the parking lot or maybe out and walking or something, and you do what you normally wouldn't do and say, do you need help with anything today? Or maybe you'll see someone in a restaurant, if you're going to restaurants, or something, and say, can I buy your lunch? This is our story today, that even when my faith fails, my God won't. And when love guides you, you follow it. And blessing others is the path to a blessed life. And with that, I hope you have a blessed week.